My name is Christabel, and I'm going to get started. So, good evening again, and thank you so much for being a part. Tonight, we're going to talk about entrepreneurship. I double as chair of Ahaspora, but I actually also work in youth employment and jobs with the World Bank. So this is something that is professionally a major interest of mine. And so I'll start by giving you some research and facts around the entrepreneurship and employment system in Ghana and Africa. And based on that, our speakers will speak to us about the different pieces of it. I would like us all to really not focus too much on what the world is looking at, because as far as I'm concerned and from where I sit, anytime there is some sort of a tragedy in the world, the smartest people and the most strategic people will thrive. And so position yourself as one of the people who will thrive, and you'll see that COVID actually has a lot of blessings in disguise. You just have to unpack it. So in Ghana, we know that on the continent, actually, by 2035, we'll have more youth than any category of people on the continent. We call it the youth bulge. That could be an opportunity, and it could also be a challenge. It becomes an opportunity if we can find employment for youth, which is why entrepreneurship becomes a topic, because there aren't a lot of jobs in the sense of, wage employment available for people. The public sector, for example, is quite full, and the private sector, which remains engine for growth, is pretty specific in terms of opportunities available for wage employment. And so entrepreneurship becomes an option that is important in terms of creating jobs for yourself. Now, one thing I also want to note is that entrepreneurship is not just about running a company. It is a mindset, and it requires critical thinking. It requires thinking on your feet. It requires risk-taking and so much more. And so don't see entrepreneurship simply as, oh, I've opened a bead-making shop, so I'm an entrepreneur. No, it goes way beyond that. And so let's look at it holistically today. We'll hear a little bit more in terms of actually the small and medium enterprises, which are the majority of companies in Ghana. Approximately 85% of all companies are small and medium enterprises, and of which they contribute to 70% of our GDP. So this is a very important group for those of you who are within the small and medium enterprise group. Kosi, who is the director of NBSSI, will tell us a little bit more about that when we get to her. But in the meantime, just note that you are actually a very important piece of our country's economy. And so it's important that you try to thrive. Unemployment is about 12%, as the last data from the Labor Force Survey of Ghana in 2015. We're yet to see updated information. But the issue actually in Ghana is not so much unemployment, but underemployment. And so we need to make sure that our particularly youth, and when I say youth, we're talking about ages 15 through 35. I like to think on the African continent that we should look more at about 40 because of delayed access to opportunity that tends to happen. So let's think through this in the age range according to something more like 20 through 40. That makes sense. Now, it's important that this group of people are able to, even if they create their own employment, they are able to have an ecosystem that helps them thrive. And so these are some of the pieces we'll discuss today. Finally, one thing I will tell you is that from World Bank research that was done in 2016, we posited that Ghana would require 300,000 new jobs every year up until 2020 in order to become afloat in terms of the need. We didn't quite get there, and we're moving on, and there's lots of government interventions and private sector interventions that have been set up to try and curb this. But Ghana is not alone in this. I don't want to sound like a doomsday prophetess, but the reality is important for us to know that the youth employment situation is a major challenge on the continent and even globally. So it's important that as you're thinking through your piece of the puzzle, you have this global context. On that note, I would like to go into a specific discussion. Our goal today is to be very solutions oriented, providing nuggets that you can pick up and use for your business tomorrow and beyond. I am very pleased to start off with my first speaker. His name is David Hatchful, and he's the co-founder of Bloom Impact. I tell people I don't like to introduce myself. So similarly, I don't like to introduce people. I like them to do it themselves. So I'm going to turn over to David, and David is going to tell us about why he's an entrepreneur, where he is now due to COVID, whether or not he's struggling as his company is struggling, and what he's done to kind of stay afloat. So over to you, David. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Good evening, everyone. If you're in Accra, that is. As Christopher said, my name is David Hatchful, and I'm co-founder of a financial technology company called Bloom Impact. And I'll tell you a little bit about that later on. But as way of background, I'm trained as a software engineer and as a designer, designer in the sense of human-computer interaction, user experience design. And I worked for a little bit for Microsoft, for a company called Gospel.com that produced, for those of you who use Bible Gateway and other Bible softwares like that, produced those. And then also worked for the Grameen Foundation, which is a nonprofit that was interested in poverty alleviation using technology. And while I work for these companies, I focus primarily on three areas: financial inclusion, agriculture development, and also on health. So I worked in projects. I was a global technology director. And so I worked in projects in these areas all across Africa, East Asia, and also Central America. And during the course of all of these, I came from Microsoft, which was a very sort of private company and had a way of doing business. Joined a nonprofit, which also had a way of doing business. And I realized that, both these entities have a kind of role to play, but in between there was this missing gap of entities that we needed to be able to really help people come out of poverty. And so that kind of sparked my interest in entrepreneurship, and actually to put it, basically solving problems by creating businesses that can solve those problems. So identifying and solving those problems. And so that while I was still working at Grameen, I started my first startup, and because my background is technology, all my startups have been technology focused. This was Engage Spark. It was an online messaging program where we were basically trying to make it really simple for companies to create messaging campaigns, sending SMSs, voice calls, all of that. And so we set that up actually in the Philippines. It's still up, it's still running. I'm on an advisory position now. And then a couple years after that, also kind of during my time at Grameen, really realized that access to capital was a big issue, and it was something, as Christopher alluded to, that was limiting SMEs who play and contribute, as she said, 70% to our economy. And this cuts across the whole of Africa, makes it really difficult for them to operate and grow and hire more people at the rate that they need to. And so became very interested in solving this problem. And that's what led me to, and my partner, to form and start Bloom Impact in 2017. And the idea with Bloom Impact is it's a platform that matches small businesses, SMEs, to financial products like loans, current savings accounts from financial institutions. And I think in the next round of questions, I'll get more into how that's going and how COVID has affected us so far. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. I will now turn to Kosi Yankee Aye. If you can introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Hello, good evening. My name is Kosi Yankee Aye. I'm the Executive Director for the National Board for Small Scale Industries, which is the government agency mandated to strengthen and grow micro, small, and medium enterprises. Sharing a little bit about myself, I started my career in investment banking as a banker, and interesting, my first project at the bank was to support in building a fund to support microfinance institutions across the world to be able to have enough liquidity and capital to support the marginalized and small businesses across the world. And from that point, moved back to Ghana, worked for financial institutions and started my own business as an entrepreneur, running across the length and breadth of Ghana, working in agribusiness and supporting with access to finance and trying to ensure that businesses had a market for their produce, whilst at the same time supporting and building incubators and accelerators that would help MSMEs and entrepreneurs in Ghana to really grow and actually be more sustainable. And so my career has really spanned across building and strengthening small and micro, small and medium enterprises. I have my degree from Harvard Kennedy School, where I worked on public policy and public administration to really see how the public sector and private sector can work together to assure maximum returns and support for MSMEs. And with the focus and at the heart of the work we do is job creation. And as Christabel had said, youth unemployment is huge. If you look at the statistics, you would think there are a lot of employed youth. However, there's a lot of underemployment. And that's what we seek to address with the work that we do at NBSSI, whilst at the same time supporting MSMEs to grow and employ more youth and more Ghanaians. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Kosi. Our third and final speaker is Rosalind Kenya. If you can please introduce yourself, tell us a bit about what you do.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi. Good evening, everyone. I'm Rosalind Kenya. I have my own business. It's an advisory firm called Kina Advisory. We have recently gone into partnership with another Kenyan enterprise called Interstrat Services Limited, and Reshma, the CEO, is on this webinar at the moment. And we give advice to businesses who are operating or investing in Africa on environmental, social, and governance standards, which have become quite important, especially when businesses are trying to access finance from development finance institutions who happen to be one of the main sources of finance for businesses in Africa at the moment. So we give advice to them on how best to adopt and implement these standards, recognizing that they can be quite complex, they can be quite expensive, and as an African outfit or an outfit led and run by Africans, we understand the African context a lot better. So we try to help these businesses adopt, implement these standards, and really show them that rather than just being compliance issues, they can actually create value. They can be cost saving, they can lead to creating innovative products and services, they can bring about new customers. There's a lot of benefit to them. I'm a lawyer by background. I am actually based in London at the moment. I have spent a lot of time I'm Ghanaian, I have to say. I spent a lot of time in Ghana recently, but COVID has actually kept me in England for the last, 6 months? Looking forward to the borders opening and paying another visit. So that's my background.
Excellent, thank you so much. And thank you for making time to be with us today. I do know that all of you are very stretched thin, particularly at this time. So we appreciate you. Let's dive right into the conversation. David, I'll start with you. Tell us a little bit more, pick up from where you started off. A little bit more about Bloom Impact. Has COVID affected you and how? We would love to hear you. Thank you.
All right, definitely. So as a reminder, Bloom Impact is, we're an online marketplace for small businesses to get access to finance. And what that means is, or what it is we have an app that small businesses can download. They can, once they download the app, they fill out a digital profile, they apply for a financial product. So it could be a loan, savings accounts, current accounts. There are other services that are on there, but this is just a brief overview. And once they apply, what we do is we match them up to products, financial products from our financial partners. So unlike other fintechs, we do not lend money ourselves, but we match up with your commercial banks, your savings and loans, microfinance banks, and we have their products and the criteria for those products on our platform. So our system can match you to those products. It does a sort of a risk assessment of your application. And if you match the criteria for the products and you pass through sort of our de-risking process, we pass you on as a lead to the banks. And so the idea is, instead of you having to kind of go to each individual bank to try and get a loan, for example, you just come to one place, and then, you know, your application goes to the multiple banks, and you match exactly the kind of product that you need, and you are, in a sense, pre-qualified for that product. And then what happens is the banks contact you, and they, you know, depending on some checks they do themselves, they can extend to you the financial product that you matched. So we make it very easy for a small business to get access to finance, to the right kind of finance. And then we have a lot of material on financial literacy and all of that involved on the platform as well. So you can, even if you don't know anything about getting a loan, you can kind of educate yourself to that level. And on the bank side, they love it because we're basically bringing them new clients that they otherwise would not have access to. And also we kind of make it cheaper for them to kind of get down market, meaning smaller SMEs, which is also a market they're interested in, but quite costly for them to access. And so that's what's been working since 2017. But when COVID hit, as you can imagine, especially during the lockdown, all the businesses basically halted. And so we are a marketplace. And so on the demand side, where SMEs wanted financial, that demand just vanished because people were not doing businesses. And so they didn't need at that point, need the financial products. And even if they did, they were a bit worried about how they were going to pay back, because it wasn't very clear when we were going to come out of lockdown, when COVID was going to be over, if business was going to pick up. And so people were a bit hesitant to apply. And as you can imagine, especially in Ghana, the banks, just as background, Bloom Impact is both in Ghana and in Nigeria. But the story I'm sharing is actually happening in both places very similarly. But as you can imagine, banks were also very nervous about lending. And it's an interesting situation for the financial institutions, because they're at a point where they really want to lend to basically grow their portfolio, grow their companies, but it's so risky because it's not clear how somebody's going to pay you back if you give them that money within, you know, the months and all of that. And so they've been very hesitant. They've, you know, kind of changed their models around where they're trying to only lend to people they already have on their books. And this basically started right around March when, you know, COVID hit. And so basically business slowed down. The demand side slowed down. People were not looking for loans. And then the supply side was also very nervous. Right after the lockdown was down, a lot of businesses, you know, basically rushed back because they needed to transact, they needed to make money. And, you know, we saw a sharp increase in people looking for financial products. But again, the banks weren't ready, right? Because it's, and one of the biggest things, especially with SMEs, banks are afraid of is somebody's going to get money and use it on consumption, which is, you know, you buy a fridge or you buy something for the home, you pay for a funeral, something like that, rather than putting it into your business. And coming out of COVID, you know, that need, it was very difficult for banks to distinguish if SME is getting this money because he needs to go pay, you know, rent or do something for the business or take care of some personal expenses. And so it's been, I mean, they're slowly kind of figuring out ways and warming up to, you know, give him more money, but and figuring out strategies for doing that. But they're still, you know, very hesitant. And so that's the scenario that as Bloom Impact, we found ourselves in, where the marketplace we had created, basically, you know, it was uneven in terms of demand and in terms of the supply. And so in terms of dealing with that, the actual core business piece where we were kind of doing the matching, we need both the banks to be supplying and the SMEs to be demanding. And in a lot of ways, that's the balance that we needed to create when we went into COVID. And it was very difficult to do because just the external environment didn't allow for that. And so to stay alive, we had to kind of, you know, really think through what our offering was and figure out the best way to kind of go ahead. And we did a couple of things. What I'll do is I'll break it down into kind of two different approaches. The first is internally, so our operations, how we manage to stay up. As any, you know, SME would know or entrepreneur know, you know, keeping your costs low is important. And so the first thing we did internally was to start looking at our recurring costs and figuring out which ones we could slash. The first was rent. And now typically I try to advise, especially startups, is don't rent until you absolutely need to. But at a certain stage of your business, you need to, have your team together so you can build that team culture. You can, people want to see your office, all of that. But when COVID hit, one of the first things we did was go to our landlords and basically negotiate and say, listen, we're going to be in lockdown. Nobody's going to be coming. We understand that you have to make your money as well, but it's not going to be possible. And they were accommodating, and we were able to negotiate a rate that cut down, our rent, which is an example of a real carrying cost. We did that across the books, things that we were paying monthly for that we knew we would not use as much. We were able to either get it for free or cut it down, right? So even if you had a Zoom account or something that you were paying for, you contact Zoom and say, hey, listen, this is not happening, we're not making money. And a lot of companies were actually being willing to offer that. And so that helped bring our costs down. Now, our biggest cost is our employees. And so once we realized that this may be a long-term thing, we sat down with them, spoke with them, and decided to do bring everybody down in terms of how much we were paying them, but we also linked it to how much time they were working. And so initially we did an 80% cut. And then when we realized that it was going to be a longer time period, we came to 50%. And so people were receiving 50% of their pay, but we're also working 50% of the time. And this wasn't the way we did it, because we were small, was not just to say, hey, this is what's happening, but we tried to make it more of a conversation with them and made it very clear why we were doing this. And also made it very clear that this is just tied to the current situation. So as things improve, it would improve. And I think making that very clear with the employees is key. And I've been amazed at the loyalty they've shown with us, being willing to kind of go through this with us. So that's sort of on the internal side, some of the things we did. Obviously, we moved to remote working, and I'll save that for the end. I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. On the business side, what we did was, because we knew, so the way our business model works is the banks pay us for the people we send their way. And so what we ended up doing was spending a lot of time just staying in touch with them. Both the banks and also I have investors who have invested in the business. And so what we did was, using a lot of the communication technologies that were available, Zoom, Skype, all of that, just, scheduling meetings with them, trying to have, face-to-face virtual meetings where you just give them an update on what you were doing, how things were going, and also asking questions. Especially with the banks, we have a lot of questions about where they saw the market going, what strategies we're trying to employ to deal with the situation as well, and that kept us informed and allowed us to also adapt. But apart from that, it kept the relationship going with our investors and with our bank partners, and we also did that with our clients. And so we kind of started contacting our clients. We knew they were at home. We knew they didn't have much. They were very anxious, wanted to get back to business, but we would contact them, have little conversations with them, share tips on how they could survive. And some of the things we were finding out for ourselves, COVID was a great time to sit back and look at our approach, our strategy, and to try and figure out, what are the core things that we need to start doing better, or where are the kind of strategic shifts that we can make, that we can focus on now because we don't have the pressure of having to deliver to the banks. We were sharing the same things with our clients, saying, listen, you're a hairdresser, you're stuck, people can't come to your space. What are some of the techniques you can use to maybe keep business going, or keep your clients, engaged and, front and center, or keep you front and center of your clients, so that when things change around, they still know that you're there. And so we use, a lot of the communication technologies to, keep in touch with the key stakeholders of our business. Now, maybe to wrap up a little, one of the key things we did, obviously, and everybody had to do, was have people work remotely. Now, because we are partly, largely a technology company, we already sort of had a, remote working program in place. Some people worked home a couple of days of the week from home. So it wasn't too difficult having everybody go, but it's different, right? So I have a technology team and a sort of an operations team. The operations team are very communal, they're very together, right? They're seeing people, they're always going out. So it was a little harder for them. And we realized very quickly that once you start implementing remote work, there are a couple of issues that come up that you have to try and address. So the first was, collaboration. It's very easy when you're sitting in the same room to kind of collaborate, ask for help, all of that. So that was sort of if you will, a mindset that we had to inculcate within the workers to try and get them to, reach out and to be able to support that. There's technology tools like Slack that we used. It's a little slightly different from, like Zooms and Skype, in that you can really have conversations and you can, share documents and, even have calls through it. So that allowed us to kind of amp up the collaboration between the workers, even though they were remote. The other piece is that, people actually get lonely. People like coming to work sometimes because that's where their friends are, that's where, their colleagues are. And so people were getting lonely, and that can really demotivate them when it comes to working. And so for us, for example, what we did was created an informal WhatsApp group. That was one that existed already, but we kind of amped up the use of it, where it was just, everybody on there chatting about non-work things, sometimes work things, how wedding plans were going, things like that. That allowed us to kind of keep the informal chatter going and helping people feel that they were part of a community, even though we were, spread across the city. And then I think two other things that are kind of related. Some people were finding it difficult to unplug because you're working from home the whole time, you're behind your computer, hours pass, you don't know that hours have passed. So there's that. And then on the sort of the other end of the spectrum, the distractions from home can make it very difficult for people to concentrate and get things done. And so one thing that we did was to basically, people were already on halftime, but we made it also flexible time, right? And so what that means is, you do the work when you can do it. So people didn't feel the pressure to be on the 8 to 5, sitting behind a computer and all of that. But what that also means is you have to be able to keep track of tasks. Right. So, I talked to my tech guys. I'm like, these are the things we're working on Monday. We have tools like Trello that we use to track everything that everybody has to do. It's very simple. It's free. This is what you're working on. And so when I come on at night at 9, I can see what you've done, what you've not done. You can leave notes in there. I can find out where you've had difficulties. I can go on Slack. I can share information with you. So these tools really allow people then with the flexible hours to work when they could, but also to be able to produce and keep being productive. But a lot of that has worked because the company is in a lot of ways also technical and technology based. And so part of what I did in preparation for this was speak to other businesses that were not so technology based to start with. And so I had a couple of friends who ran they run a company that, takes raw materials and shea butter and such and produce their own, products out of that, lotions, juices, drinks, all of that. And one of the things they did, and this they did as a collaborative actually, was they realized that a lot of businesses like theirs were struggling because all of a sudden the market had vanished, right? Nobody was coming to their stores. They were having all these issues. And so one of the things they did, which we advised a lot of our SMEs to do, and I saw a lot of other businesses that I am a client to also do, was to go online. And so very quickly they were able to use tools, e-commerce tools, and there are several around our share list, to basically create an online store where they were able to put their products, and they were linked up with a couple of different delivery services that had also popped up. And they were, back to business, so to speak. And obviously creating the online experience is very different and takes some work, but, they were able to very quickly put things together and get it, launch it and then begin to improve on it. And so now, a lot of them, this has become a significant part of their business, being able to sell through online means and using local delivery. And I've seen people be very creative using WhatsApp business, especially using Instagram as well. So you have an Instagram store, or you just even put up your pictures on Instagram, you link up with a delivery service, you can begin to sell your products again. Another key thing I've seen them do is switch to digital payments platforms, right? A lot of people were used to getting cash, or maybe sometimes they would have a Momo account, and that usage has gone up. That allows you as a small business to be able to still charge for your services, receive the money without having to worry about going to the bank or going to somebody's office to pick things up. And thankfully, the regulators have been very good about increasing the transaction limits, both on mobile money and other transaction platforms. That makes it really easy to transfer a lot more money daily than we used to be able to. Yeah, so I think I'll stop there. Obviously, if there are more questions afterwards, I'll pick it up.
Thank you so much, David, for telling your story and also for giving us some very practical tools. From what I heard from you, one of the main things to look at is how to keep your costs low, which is really important. And then staying in touch with your clients and investors, knowledge sharing, working remotely and figuring out how to adapt to that, collaborating amongst your team. And then the key one was moving online, technology, which we will come back to. But now I'd like to switch.
Yep. Sorry,
David,
just one more point.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, so you started by saying entrepreneurship is not only sort of starting a business, but it's a mindset, which is very right. And I think what COVID has highlighted is that as an entrepreneur, you always have to be able to adapt and be able to change. And so you know, a lot of us as entrepreneurs have had to maintain that mindset of figuring out how to survive. The other thing is that for people who may not have their own businesses, you can be what we call an intrapreneur, right? An entrepreneur within a company. And it's very important during these sort of very uncertain times to not feel like, you're going to be stuck and be only, you can't go to work, so you can't do anything. But this is when you can get creative and you can come up with ideas that can help the business, survive and, bring that sort of entrepreneurial spirit into the business side.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think really what you're saying, most entrepreneurs will agree with you that COVID gave us a test of time. I'm going to move on to look at what our government is doing. We're a third world country, and whether we like it or not, government has a major role in pretty much helping us survive. And we're very fortunate to have Kosi Yankee-Aye, who is probably the busiest woman in Ghana right now, doing a lot of work in support of small and medium enterprises. So we're really happy to have you on. Kosi, tell us a little bit about, you told us what MBSSI is. Can you tell us what you're doing to support small and medium enterprises prior to COVID, but also with COVID? Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Christabel. I think that COVID, from our previous speaker, was quite clear that COVID has really impacted a lot of micro, small, and medium enterprises in every country, and Ghana was not spared in this. And we're fortunate enough that the government came up with an intervention that would provide some relief to the MSMEs that had been impacted by COVID-19. And what we did, I think that immediately the lockdown started, the president came up with a concept to see how we could bring together some resources to provide relief to the MSMEs. This came up with the 600 million Ghana cedis that was earmarked to support the MSMEs. Immediately, we had to go into work mode, so we never locked down. We actually had to come out of lockdown and figure out how best we could support and provide the needed resources to the MSMEs across the country. Prior to this, we had been providing support to MSMEs. As I mentioned, our mandate is to strengthen and grow micro, small, and medium enterprises. So across the nation, we had been providing access to business development services. We had been providing technical assistance support. We had been providing access to finance and facilitating a lot of access to finance. And to give the numbers, really looking at the past 3 years from 2017 to 2020, since I started at NBSSI, we had actually facilitated in excess of almost 40 million Ghana cedis of finance to businesses, not only in Accra or Kumasi, but we had increased the number of our business resource centers to 180 districts across the nation. So what we had done was to really bring business development services and support to the doorsteps of businesses, of entrepreneurs, of the youth in this nation and make it more accessible for them so they can actually grow or even start a business. So a lot of our intervention had, even in the past 3 years, really targeted about 300,000 beneficiaries, which for a government institution looking at supporting the MSMEs was a huge number. And so our intervention did not end when COVID-19 and the pandemic hit. So when the president came up with the intervention, we had to pick it up and immediately implement it, because that was an important policy that would bring a lot of relief. So besides that, we also had to go again and look at where do we bring in extra resources. And so the first thing we did was also speak to some of the participating financial institutions we'd be working with, and they committed some funds as well to the intervention. We also went to see some of our partners we had worked with in the past. So we went to talk to them and came up with a new strategy and said, how do we support MSMEs? Looking at it, there are two phases to the support that they needed. They needed an emergency relief, and then they needed a recovery and a resilience relief, because you could not only intervene now and forget about the future, because what they needed now was to stabilize. How do we stabilize them and then sustain them and work with them to accelerate their growth? So the government's intervention, one, was looking at providing the CAP Business Support Scheme, which is the Coronavirus Alleviation Program, the business support scheme, which had the initial seed funding of 600 million Ghana cedis. Now, the intervention was to make it more accessible to people across the nation. So immediately we had to come up with a technology platform where we could provide access for people across the nation who had been impacted. Bear in mind that only 3 cities had been impacted, which was Greater Accra, Greater Kumasi, and the Kasua areas. However, the ripple effect was far-reaching, because people who had goods and were coming from Tamale to come and sell in Accra or Kumasi, from Techiman, all across could not come into these cities. And these cities were really the major market cities for them. And so the interventions needed to go beyond these cities that had been locked down. So we had to come up with a way to really see where we had to focus our intervention. Then there was no data, right? Because we don't have a lot of data in this nation that covers the work that we do. And so we had to figure out, with the limited data and resources that we had, where were the people and how were we going to find them? And so we set up a platform where we could reach the beneficiaries across the nation. In the process of doing that, you realize that yes, technology is huge, but network services do not really go that far. So once you leave Accra, even on your way to Koforidua, you might miss, there are certain towns across the way who don't have networks, so they can't even go online to apply for these relief programs that we had put there. So immediately we had to come up with ways to even print papers and place them within our business advisory centers to provide that support. And it was very important because there were 2 things that the president made very clear. He said, one, you live in a very informal economy, and so you cannot leave behind the informal, because they make up 80% of the already 80% micro, small, and medium enterprises that you have. So you cannot leave them behind. And so you have to figure out a way to bring them in. So in thinking about this, we realized that then this was also a great opportunity for government to formalize an informal sector that has been existing for a long time. And because it had been in the informal sector, we hadn't really clearly figured out or had a grip of them to understand what kind of interventions to even give them in the future or even now. And so through this process, we realized that we needed to provide some form of formalization or support them to a certain extent. Then we had to provide the funding that government had given to the beneficiaries. Then thirdly, we realized we could not just give them access to finance without also providing some form of technical support, because at the end of the day, there was going to be a lot of need for turnarounds for businesses that were almost close to being on their knees or collapsing. And so we had to provide technical assistance support as well as give them access to finance. Then in the process of doing that, the numbers that applied were so high that and after conversations from the Ministry of Finance and the President decided that let's give some more funding to support it. So an extra 150 million was added, but also really targeting specific sectors that we had overlooked. in the initial phase of our intervention period. So government looked at that, and in the process, we got a lot of other support coming in because people had seen the work we had done. And in the past, we had worked so hard and really shown massive impact and results that they were willing to come on board and provide us with more support. So the MasterCard Foundation also came on board and gave us 90 million Ghana cedis to provide access to funding to beneficiaries as well across the nation, which would be launched immediately after the government's funding disbursement so that we could support those who might not have access or did not get access to the government one. In the process, we also realized that we were not in normal times, and the way we do business has changed forever. The way we assess things, the way we even look at our business, and I think Rosalind will talk a lot about that, which is even what is the impact, the environmental and social, but things that we didn't think about needed to have come to the forefront of the conversations that we had. And then we also realized that we need to change the way we do business and the way our clients do business. So government decided to play a major role, and it was an intervention that government had been working on, and I think the Vice President has been working on it in terms of digitalization. But now it was really knocking at our doorsteps, and we had to change the way we did things. So we got funders to come in and say, we're going to support you, NBSSI, to support your clients or the MSMEs to digitalize the way they do things. And so currently we've designed a lot of digitalization programs, and we're also designing others to work with our partners and with the MSMEs and make them use technology more than they've ever used it, use other tools, really see the impact of their businesses and reconsider how they've done businesses forever. And so this intervention and government coming in has really brought to fore in our interventions looking at one, providing access to finance, two, digitalizing the economy and really focusing on the micro, small and medium enterprises with regards to access to markets, access to tools to strengthen their businesses, to accelerate the growth of their businesses amongst other things, and really strongly looking at a formalized economy. Because this process has taught us and shown us the magnitude of our informal sector, which was so huge and had been ignored for years. But now we had been able to move them to the forefront of the work that we were doing. And so at NBSSI, a government agency mandated to really support and strengthen MSMEs, that is where we are. And this is not the only intervention. I think that, Christabel, you are aware of the lot of interventions that the government is putting in place and has been working on through NBSSI, through the World Bank, through government, through other initiatives, really looking at how do we strengthen the micro, small, and medium enterprises. And so the funding and support that we've mentioned now is not the only one. Under the Ghana Economic Transformation Program, you are aware that we also have a few millions to support the micro and the high small businesses to see how we can push high growth businesses to really accelerate and stabilize at a time like this. And so this intervention is also waiting to be implemented, which is a major government initiative that we are working on. Another that is really dear to the heart of the president, where he's worked on and has worked with us through the whole and entire process, is also looking at the jobs and skills and our Young Africa Works program with MasterCard Foundation, which has been dear to his heart because of the job creation content of it. And so these other interventions are others that we're working on as a government entity. And our goal is to really work and leverage private sector to ensure that we both deliver on growing and stabilizing the MSMEs at a time such as this. Thank you.
Lucy, thank you very much for elaborating on the work that NBSSI does. I will come back to you to tell us how do we get some of this money. So hang tight, start writing your notes, I'll be back. Now I'm going to move to Rosalind. We've waited and we're excited to hear from you. Give us a little bit of insight as an advisory service. My focus was really on looking at sustainability and building international partnerships. But based on what you've heard, if you want to add on to that, that's also fine. Please go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think, first of all, I have to acknowledge that these are tough times and not everyone is surviving in them. And we have to sort of acknowledge that. But the point is that the title of this webinar is Beyond Survival and Thrive. And we've talked, I mean, David has been very good about talking about the survival for now. I think it's important. And what Kosi has also shared is some about survival, but also about the thriving in the future. And I want to talk a bit about the thriving. And for me, in our world, one of the means of thriving, particularly if we're thinking about scaling up businesses and businesses scaling out beyond the borders of Ghana. We've heard about Africa now, so we need to begin to think about that. And it doesn't matter what size our business is, we all need to think about how we're going to grow, whether it's exponentially or deeper. And one of the means of doing so is to ensure that we can comply with standards that extend outside our borders. And we talk a lot about environmental, social, and governance standards. Now, for a lot of people, these might sound very complicated. So I want to simplify them. Environmental standards really, and best practice really means you are taking care of your natural environment and the natural resources you need for your business. So it can be the way you use your energy, the way you use water. Social is the way you treat people who are impacted by your businesses. And first and foremost, that would be your employees, but it could also be your suppliers, people in your value chain. It could also be communities around where you live. For example, how you dispose of your waste. How does that impact your next door neighbors or the area in which you live in? And governance, for me, is very simple. It's about doing business ethically and with integrity. So that's what we're talking about. Now, the international standards can be very complex. There are loads of them, you know, like the International Finance Corporation standards, which can be very complicated. But I think just to boil down that if you do adopt and implement some of these standards, you actually can create operational efficiency, which saves costs, something that David mentioned. And it's not just a question of sort of asking your landlord to maybe hold off on your rent for a while, but it's actually adding something to your bottom line permanently. So we have an example of a soft drinks manufacturer in South Africa who invested $8,000, which might sound a lot, but you know, they're a medium-sized enterprise, into a system to recover and reuse water that they were using in their bottling plant. And they did this together with building staff awareness about why this was good for the business. And they reduced their water consumption and therefore water expense by 27%. And also their wastewater productivity by 61%. And the payback of this was a 3-year period. But within that 3-year period, they recouped their investment and then also made these savings. So I think it's very important to keep that in mind and to begin to think about how businesses now can use those sort of cost savings, whether it's how we use our energy. Is there some way of investing so we can be more energy efficient and therefore cut down on our costs, which is permanent? So it's not just for the survival period, but it's for the thriving period. Another thing is to think innovatively about how to meet a social need. And I've done quite a bit of talking to businesses you know, across the continent. And in Nigeria, for example, there's a lady who used to supply fruit and vegetables through ShopRite. Now, when lockdown came about, it meant the shops were closed. So people, you know, couldn't go to the shops to buy food. And that meant that there was a cut down in her ability to supply ShopRite. So what she did, something David mentioned, is to begin through WhatsApp and social media to begin to sell directly to retailers. And she says she's seen a 60% increase in her revenue. She saw a need, she planned for it, she used simple means to do it. People now have become very health conscious, so they're quite keen to understand where their fruit and veg is coming from. She managed to employ quite a lot of people to be able to deliver the goods to customers, but she's managed to cut out, sorry ShopRite if you're on or listening, and to be able to supply directly to customers. I'm sure she will supply to ShopRite too, but she has created a new customer base who know her, and that is thinking creatively about it. And I also think that by using these standards, you know, you can build your reputation and your brand awareness. So there is a doctor in Kenya, you might have heard about him, who recognized that in addition to PPE equipment, ventilators and the rest, there was a need for oxygen for COVID. And oxygen was in short supply. So what he did was to build oxygen tanks in the busiest hospitals, okay, arrange for those to be built, where there was reliable energy supply. And then the oxygen was distributed in cylinders with what we call, you know, like the milkman model into remote areas. And again, this is something that he would like to extend beyond Kenya, where he is, into the rest of Africa. Now, the reason I've given these examples as examples of innovations that will thrive is because these are the sort of businesses. Sorry, I should mention that closer to home in Ghana, I hear that Ahaspora, which produces alcoholic and non-alcoholic drinks, began to produce sanitizers to meet the need for sanitizers during that time. Again, innovation, creativity. I'm sure he continued producing his alcoholic drinks, but it's something that you can do alongside your business to expand your business or to deepen your business. Now, what's interesting, and my partner Reshma knows more about sustainable financing, is that there is a source of financing known as sustainable financing. This is financing that takes environmental, social, and governance criteria very seriously as a priority. So if, for example, if you say, I want to, like the bottling plant did, I want to put in a new system to make sure that I have better water efficiency, that's the sort of finance you can get access to expand your business. But it does mean that you have to be aware of these standards. And they are very complex, I know. And I always say that think about them as a journey. You don't want to start off sprinting, you know, particularly it's a marathon. So you just want to pace yourself. Look at what's most important for your business. Look at what can give you the best return fastest, and then go for that. And as you're doing that, tell your story so that people know that you're on a journey. Tell your story that, you know, I'm starting with this. I do want to reach Z, but I'm at A, going to B, C, D, and the rest. And there's financing available for that. One has to know where to find it. One needs to know what sort of criteria you need to access it, but it is there. And it's a different sort of financing as it stands. But even our local banks actually require environmental, social, and governance standards to be met for some money that they give out. So for me, I think that's one area of thriving that, particularly for us as African businesses, SMEs, we think that's something that is for the bigger businesses, it's out there, it's overseas. But I think if we begin to think about how we can adopt and adapt these standards to suit us, and one of the things I'm passionate about is that how do we make sure that these international standards actually take into account our local context? How do we make sure that they also take into account the different phases that our MSMEs are in? I mean, and how do we, and this is what we do between Kina and Interstrat, how do we help these businesses really begin to adopt these standards, adapt them, and create value for them? So for me, it's not about compliance. For us, it's not about compliance. It's really about value creation to thrive in future. Now, just to add very quickly, I was speaking to someone recently and I said, I wonder whether environmental, social, and governance standards are still at the fore of people's minds now. And he said no, because everybody's thinking about liquidity and profitability. Fine, I really appreciate that. But the consumer now and the consumer of the future, the millennials and the Generation Z, as they're called, are concerned about these things. They're concerned about how their products are made. They don't want child labor. They don't want modern slavery. They don't want, I believe, people behaving badly. So these things are your future consumers and your future investors. So it's good to begin to think now about how you're going to meet the needs of those consumers now. So I think I'll leave it there if there are any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosalind. This was amazing. Major nuggets. As you can see, participants, we started a journey with you, and I'm using Rosalind's term of tell your story and let people know about the journey. And based on that, our journey really was an entrepreneur describing how he has survived during COVID and the tools to use. And then we went to a government specialist who is in making policy and implementation towards our survival. And then we've come to an advisory firm who has shown us how to thrive. And so it's, in my opinion, I'm seeing kind of a linear graph of where we move along the curve. what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over to the audience to see if there are any questions. What you need to do is raise your hand if you have a question, but I'll also read in the chat box, and then we can come back to our speakers to continue. Like, I know everybody wants to know where the NBSSI money is, so we will ask Kosi that question. The first question that I see is, David, participants want to know if the Bloom Impact app is free. Can you give us a yes or no answer, please?
Yes, it is free. Yeah, it's free to SMEs. Yeah.
Good to know. Thank you very much. Kosi, somebody wants to know, is there a platform to receive information on NBSSI technical and training support for businesses beyond the CAP business funding? So a platform where they can go find information beyond CAP.
Yes, I think that our website is being remodeled to do that. Originally, we had done a lot of that through our business advisory center. So once you were part of it, they will share information with you. But more and more, we are shifting everything online. So you'd find it, and we even advertise in the newspapers as well, so that more people can have access and benefit from it.
Excellent. So we go to your website, and then we can get more information, correct?
Yeah, so we're building and working on that, yes.
Okay, that sounds good. I don't see any hands up unless my team, can you tell me if I'm missing hands up? If there are no hands raised, okay, there is another question. Please, also, which are the best standards and certificates to look out for in your business? Which ones are globally recognized, and how do we contact or have access to these organizations? Rosalind, I don't know if this would go to you. Are there setting standards that are global that people should be looking out for?
Okay, the best known environmental, social, and governance, no, let me start off. There are lots of standards, and it all depends on your business. I mean, I've talked about environmental, social, and governance standards, but you have standards for almost every sector. I mean, there are product standards, there are health and safety standards. You know, I've talked about environmental, social, and governance standards. So it really depends on the nature of your business. And I think the important, and fortunately, we now have the famous Mr. Google. So even you can begin, you know, going on Google. And one of the things, I'm glad the question was asked, because I think we need to spend a bit of time educating ourselves and educating ourselves together. And I think, Christabel, this may be something that Ahaspora can do, and maybe even Kosi, for small to medium enterprises. Just begin to gather in a place, a portal, a list of the standards that there are. There are so many of them. So I think the thing is to look at your business, maybe do a bit of a search to see what sort of standards are required for your business. But when it comes to environmental, social, and governance, the most popular ones, I'll say, are those that have been developed by the International Finance Corporation, the IFC. Now, those standards are also used by development finance institutions who, as I've said, are one of the main sources of funding for businesses in Africa and in emerging economies. I mean, it's an adaptation of those, so they use those standards. So those are the ones for ESG, but there's so many product standards, so many health and safety standards, so many service standards, you know, we can't begin. And there are international ones, and then there are national ones, and there are some regional ones. There are ones that are regulated, and there are ones that are voluntary. So it's a huge mass, and that's why you do need some guidance in it.
Right. Right. No, thank you very much, Rosalind. I think you made a very good point about having information in one place, and this is something we'll definitely look into to help SMEs know where to find things. But I also want to add, just from where I sit, one of the problems we have is people just don't want to go through the effort of doing these things. And the reality is that if you want to thrive, you're going to have to put in the work, the paperwork. You know, we're a very oral tradition kind of society, and it's important that we start looking at documenting what we do. So thank you so much for letting us know, and we'll come back to you to help us to document these. Next question. Hello, David. How do you access the risk of businesses before passing them on to the banks? Do you pass suitable clients for banks to continue process, or follow through completely before you pass them on? I think the question is basically asking what your process is. Go ahead. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Sorry, we just had a power cut, but magic of MTN. So yeah, so basically our process is once you apply and it comes to us, we do some basic checks. So what I call KYC checks. We pull a credit report. We make sure that you are in good standing. Basically, you're a good lead. We check the IDs and make sure it's right, and then we pass it on to the bank. So if you match 5 or 6 different banks, we pass it on to them. And then we basically check and make sure that they contact you. They basically try and ascertain that you've actually applied for this product. They have some requirements that they don't share with us. So at that point, they would ask you to provide that. It's not often, but they do that. And then from that point, they either extend the loan or they give a reason for not extending it. One of the advantages of our app, and one of the things we push for, is we realized a lot of small businesses, they would apply for a loan and not know why they've been rejected. So they had no idea of how to improve upon the application. So one of the things we try to make sure as part of the process is if you did not receive the product that you've applied for, that there's a reason given. And typically this helps the businesses to kind of improve on the application or address missing gaps in their businesses that play a part in their business.
Great, thank you so much, David. Kosi, a question for you, and then we'll come back to our speakers. A question for you. It says, private schools are worst affected in the COVID period. What is NBSSI doing to support private schools?
Well, we're doing a lot. Since the start of the intervention, we've already disbursed 120,000 beneficiaries as of today across the country, and that was not an easy task, but we put in all the effort to ensure that, because there were a lot of other sectors too that initially had also been impacted. With the private schools, we also have specific interventions targeted at them. And it's interesting, and I think it's good to know that the president, in looking at the second disbursements that they gave to NBSSI, was for us to take a close look at the private schools as well as tertiary universities as well, who had also been negatively impacted. And so NBSSI is working as much as it can to ensure that we work with we support some, not all. We can't support everybody in Ghana, but we can support some of them. And so we'll work doing our best. So we've been speaking a lot, and we've had a lot of meetings with the associations, NACOPS, and a lot of other private school associations. There are more than one of them. So it's interesting how we need to make sure that we are facilitating and speaking with all of them to address the needs of some of their clients. Yes.
Thank you, Kosi. While you have the mic, if you can tell us, people want to understand how they can access some of the funding you mentioned. You said 600 million from presidents, 90 million from MasterCard. We have some 100 million-ish from the World Bank and such. What do people need to do to be able to access? What is their eligibility criteria and where do they go if we can?
So first of all, the government funding ended already. And so we opened the applications. I think we did a lot of noise on that because we didn't want to exclude people or people to think that they were not given enough information. So we gave as much information as possible. And even when we closed, we gave the opportunity for those who hadn't finalized their application so we could mop up and also close up the session. For the MasterCard one, we're currently working on the MasterCard one, and the portals will go live in a few days' time. And so we'll also launch that out and make a lot of noise about it because we want to see the need and also be able to support those who might not have benefited from one of our interventions or the other. And so all of that comes on our website. So through our website, you will be able to facilitate and access the needed tools to be able to apply. And then also with the digitalization program we're working on, all of that will come online. So we're looking at first week in September, a lot of it coming online for people to apply since the government intervention has actually ended.
Thank you very much, Kosi. To everybody on the call, I have put the MBSSI website in our chat. That is our start of access to information. Please pay attention to it and see how you can be helped. I want to come back to Rosalind, and you started really giving us some nuggets around thriving, looking at what the standards are and what we'll need to do as small businesses. I just wanted to give you some time to elaborate a little bit more on this information and how we can build partnership. I think what COVID has taught us, you did talk about AFTA, which you're so right, is we need to start collaborating better. So if you can give us a little bit more information, that would be great. Thank you.
One of the things I've learned in my rather long career is the importance of collaboration. We don't know everything. We don't have everything. I've been quite fortunate to work across the continent of Africa. And there is such treasure across the continent. I think just starting off, one of the best things would be for Ghanaian businesses, even before AFTA takes off, to begin to find out which other businesses across the borders or across the continent are doing similar things. I'm sure people would wish to collaborate and learn from each other. There are some who are much further afield. I mean, I have great relationships, for example, in Kenya, but there's some people who may really wish, like the East-West Africa corridor, which doesn't exist, but let's call an imaginary one, and to begin to learn from each other what works in Kenya that we can possibly do in Ghana and provide there, and vice versa. And some countries are much further ahead when it comes to these standards that I'm talking about. And so again, there's an ability to, I think, learn from them. But outside the borders of the African continent itself, I think if we wish to supply abroad, or even if we want to become part of the supply chain of international companies that are resident within Ghana, it does mean we do need to comply with some of these standards that I've been talking about. And that really does mean understanding these companies better. And they sometimes have programs that can actually help to build up capacity, help to, so I think it's important again to investigate. You made a point about the need to make an effort, and I would say it's so important. It's not, it takes a lot of effort. I mean, those companies that I've talked to who have survived and thrived have had to dig deep, really dig deep, even if it's using what they've had in their own hands at the time, but they've had to dig deep, they've had to spend time, they've had to research. It's something we don't do very well. We don't do a lot of research. We need to do customer research. We need to do market sector research. If we want to go beyond our borders, we need to understand how other countries operate. We need to be a lot more consumer centric. So I think there's quite a lot of work to be done before we talk about partnering. It's not just a case of, as some people do call me up, do you know somebody who would want to do business with me? Actually, no, I don't, because I don't know you. And you need to do some work to understand what you need from your partners, and then you can begin to select a partner. So I think there's a lot of homework that needs to be done. But partnership there are out there, and I think there's a lot that can be done in terms of partnership, both within the African continent and outside of it.
Thank you so much. What I heard you clearly say, and I love it, is look out for somebody who is doing the same thing as you elsewhere, and do your research to see how you can collaborate. And I think that is so important. Thank you. I'm going to go back to questions. This is about the participants who joined us. So let's see what other questions we have. To David, Margaret wants to know, how do you know the banks? How do we know the banks that you are dealing with? Is that something on your website, or is that open information?
Yeah, I think if you go to bloomimpact.net, you get a listing of some of the banks we're dealing with. So in some ways, what we're trying to do with Bloom Impact is change the model a bit, right? When you're using Uber, you don't really care. I mean, you want a good car, but you don't really care if it's got another driver or Adwa, right? And so what we want to focus on is the type of product that you need based on your responses to the questions. And then what our system does is matches you to the bank that can provide that product. So a short example is sometimes a small business might think they need a loan, but at the end of the day, the system can say, listen, what you actually need is a line of credit. You don't actually have to go get a loan. You can get a line of credit that can help you address this need. And we find the bank that will best match your need for a line of credit. But once you've done the application, you've gone through, we actually show you the list of bank products you've matched, and you get to decide which ones you want to submit and which ones you don't want to submit. So you do know which banks we're going to contact on your behalf before the application is done.
Great, thank you so much, David. So they tailor the needs. They try to respond to your needs by tailor processing it for you. So it will depend on which bank. Thank you very much. There's a question for Kusi. Says from Prosper, he says, with huge applicants received, how is NBSSI handling the support to really help businesses in deprived areas of Ghana, looking at vulnerable populations? Kusi.
I think we've considered all of that, and we factored that in even the design. We factored that in the implementation and disbursement. So as we speak, there's no region in this nation that has not received some funding. There's no district that has not received funding, because we took all of that into consideration, because we didn't want to leave anybody out. However, we also paid a close attention to some of the regions that had the lockdown, and also towns where there were a lot of, there was the challenge of them bringing produce to the cities. So nobody has been left behind, and we factored all of that. And I think it will be important, because we'll share all that data once everything is over, so that people are aware of what happened and how it happened.
Excellent, thank you, Kusi. Sharing the data will be really crucial. And if that's one thing I can say, we appreciate the transparency that NBSSI has shown through this process. While we have you, Kusi, I think it will be helpful if you tell us a little bit about NBSSI's reach across Ghana. I feel like a lot of people don't know how you reach across Ghana, so if you can pick on that, that would be helpful.
Yes, so our reach across Ghana, I mean, we have 180 offices in 180 districts. We are in every region in the country. We also have regional offices, with our head office being in Greater Accra region. So we have massive reach. And we actually also work with various partners on the ground to ensure that where we are not, we can either assess or support the beneficiaries there as well. So we are trying as much as possible to bring, as I mentioned at the beginning, to bring business development support to the doorsteps of Ghanaians.
Thank you very much, Kusi. I like the next question because it's very specific, and any of you can try and respond to this. Shelley wants to know, even though the ban has sort of lifted on lockdowns, life is still tough, basically, is what she's saying. Is it advisable to establish a brick and mortar fashion shop now? Very specific, but a good question. Who wants to take this?
Maybe I'll start and the others
Sure.
can join in. So part of, I also happen to teach entrepreneurship at one of our universities.
David, we lost you. I'm hoping it's not your electricity situation. Okay, while we wait for David to come back on, Kusi or Rosalind, do you want to help answer this?
I think.
Sorry, guys. I think
okay.
Sorry, David, go ahead.
Quick,
yeah, we lost you, and then I was moving on. But go ahead, and I'll go to Rosalind.
Yeah, sorry. So the short answer I'll say is no, don't do it now. But what you do have is, at the end of the day, what you want to do is sell your fashion items. And this is a perfect opportunity for you to explore some of the digital channels that will allow you to test if people are actually interested in the materials that you have before you invest in sort of a brick and mortar store, which has quite high costs associated with it, unless it's free, right? There are a lot of people who, depending on your target market, there are a lot of clients who are still keeping at home, not going out like before COVID started. But if there are so many tools, Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook, all these tools that can allow you to create a virtual store begin to really market and target your fashion items to the kind of clientele that you want, and it can be very targeted. With Facebook, for example, you can go in and with the ad section, pick a particular demographic. And so if you know who you want to sell to, you can.
I think we lost David again. Give it a second. Let's see if we get him back. If not, we continue. Rosalind, please go ahead. I'm going to.
Well, I think David said what I want to say. I don't think the brick and mortar, I don't know whether it's a shop or it's a factory or what, but, and I do agree that the best thing to do is, if you're going to do something like that, make sure that you can use the digital space as much as you can as a marketplace. But what's interesting is, again, I'm really fascinated by the number of people who sat down and thought about what as we call it, the new world is going to look like. Now, as there's going to be a lot of remote working, I believe, I think that's going to continue quite a while. It might be good to really do some research into what sort of clothing is going to be relevant for remote working. I mean, here I am sitting in a nice jacket, it may be I want something comfortable on top. So you might begin to think about, do that research to say, what sort of clothing is for the future? Maybe people are not going to be going out as much, but they need to look smart at work, but not, the sort of smart casual. But please, one thing I'll say, I'm a great fan of fashion and a great fan of African fashion. The one thing that puts me off is the little things, like the zip that breaks or the finishing that is not good enough. I mean, and I just think if you're going into that, it's those little things that make all the difference. So you don't have to have something, big and snazzy, but think about the new market, the new sort of customers that there are there, and you can sell abroad. I mean, you'll be amazed at how much I order through DHL from Ghana. I love black soup. So I'm sitting here and I order black soup from Ghana. If somebody was to make something quite comfortable to wear at home and look smart, people would order from wherever, and you could sell it digitally and then send it off. So I just think it's a question of, again, research and knowing what's out there and who needs what.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I was smiling because I've been watching. I have a shoe fetish, and so I keep looking at shoes online, and you see that even the shoe shops online, they're no longer like really pushing out heels up until like 2 weeks ago. Everybody was talking about clogs and flip-flops, so you have to turn towards the times. And we really appreciate that. This has been really great. It's 7:32, and I do want to respect that we said we'll close at 7:30. I believe we have a whole lot of specific nuggets that we can work with, from the parts that you need to know as an entrepreneur, which is, keeping costs low, staying in touch. I think communication is key in this world. I mean, one thing I do appreciate from COVID, to be honest with you, is like today, I would not have had a panel in person and Rosalind would be able to join. No, but today she can join us from the UK and make it, so much more fulfilling. So ask yourself, how do you leverage the situation we're in today to thrive? And I really believe that we've gotten a lot of information from the NBSSI in terms of where the small and medium enterprises can reach out for funding from government sources and private sector, actually. The support system around the small businesses is important. The ecosystem of the entrepreneurs, I think, is really crucial. And so you need to, if you want to thrive, it's not just access to capital. I think people really get lost in that. You go in, say, to NBSSI, you get the money, and then, within 6 months, you're back to square one. I think that it's really important that you think through some of the information that Rosalind gave, for example, on the standards that are national and that are global that will allow you to sustain your businesses. Those are really important. Digitization, so key. I literally was writing notes, Slack, WhatsApp, Facebook, where you can tailor make your audience, Trello. And then my favorite is Google, simple Dr. Google, please. Make sure that you're researching, move away from oral response, a lot of talking, a lot of not documenting what you do. So for example, very soon I'm going to announce that we have a survey. Actually, I just did. We would like to hear your feedback for what we're doing. That is documenting what happened today, being able to look back to see what worked and what didn't work, and then we improve. Consider that in your business. Maybe when you go and do your delivery, you send a WhatsApp message with a short survey asking your client how things are going. So it's the little changes that will help you. But don't follow the crowd. I think this was an informal conversation I actually had before the call. A lot of people are doing the same things. One person picks up on the market and everybody joins because they are surviving. Ask yourself that, why are they surviving and thriving? It's because they found a niche and they jumped onto it. So if you are the 100th person in that niche, it might not work out for you as much. So then look for the other piece of the puzzle that you can solve. So thank you so much. I don't know about you, I learned a lot. So I'm very excited and happy to have had today. I hope it was also as informative for you and we can continue these conversations. But most of all, many thanks to Kosi. I know you're very busy and you made time for us. We appreciate it. To Rosalind, it's so tough to get to you and you cost a lot, let's be real. So I really appreciate your time and efforts in being here. And David, you're an Ahaspora, so I won't thank you, but thank you. Thank you for speaking today about Bloom and the work that you do. Many thanks to the over 50 people that joined the call. We really appreciate it. If we were talking to ourselves, it wouldn't have been as fun. And so we really do appreciate it. Let's keep the conversation going. Please fill out the survey. We'll also send it to you by email. But if you have any questions, you can also go to info@ahaspora.com, email us, and we'll be happy to respond in terms of how we can help you. One thing for sure we will do is to put together these environmental standards and we will post them on our website. And so that is an action that I can promise you we will do out of this meeting. Thank you so much. Have a lovely evening. For those of you in Ghana, the president is speaking at 8 o'clock. I think it will be important for you to go listen to see what our next steps are on COVID. Have a pleasant evening and enjoy your week next week. Thank you so much. Goodbye.